Hi everyone, and welcome to today's Outcome Matters event. I'm Higu Besaidenout, responsible for investment distribution enablement at Momentum Investments Group, and I will be your host today. Thank you for joining us and for your continued support of our business. We have an exciting agenda today, but before we delve into the session, let me address a few housekeeping matters. We've applied for continuous professional development or CPD points, and to make sure your attendance is verified, kindly watch the entire session and provide your ID number in the CPD section. The event platform will be accessible until the end of September 2024, granting you ample time to revisit the content and secure your CPD points. Please feel free to pose any questions in the Q&A section, and our speakers will address them in real time or respond after the session. Okay, so let's kick off the session. In our previous event, we alluded to all the elections taking place around the globe, and obviously there was a lot of focus placed on the outcome locally. I think we can all agree that the outcome of the election in SA and the subsequent formation of the GNU was a vast step in the right direction. Make no mistake, the impact on SA would have been severe if the coalition discussion went the opposite direction. There is cause for quiet optimism, and for one, I'm excited to finally see the winds of change rearing its head. Who would have thought that Eskom would be producing too much energy at the moment? But let me not get ahead of myself on that front. The next big one we're all looking to is the US election, and with the assassination attempt on Donald Trump and Joe Biden stepping aside, it's certainly an intriguing one to follow. I'll leave it there and let Nisha unpack the shift in the axis of global influence. I mentioned that we have an exciting agenda today, so let's get started. I'd like to hand over to Sonia and Therese, who will introduce and position their thinking of wealth management in MFP. Welcome, ladies, and I look forward to listening to you.
Thank you, Higu. Good day to all the MFP financial advisors and regional management. Since I joined Momentum Advice Exco with Hannes, a lot of progress has been made to ensure that we create value propositions and capabilities that will support and create value to each of the MFP practices and your clients. So to start today, I would like to share with you the 6 key strategic components that Momentum Advice will be delivering on. So firstly, it is wealth management and advice, and I'm responsible for these 2 areas. Then we have the financial oversight with Reinhard Botha, which is taking care of that. Then we also have the digital transformation bit that Pieter Bosman will take care of. And then also the business development side of the business, we have several project owners in that space. And then lastly, Marina Carstel oversees the human capital component. So as I've mentioned, I'm responsible for the advice and the wealth management value propositions. And they will play out in both businesses, Momentum Financial Planning, as well as Consult the Network business. Now, from an advice perspective, we will only have one advice strategy for the entire Momentum business. So there's one Momentum story. So that will play out exactly the same within both these businesses. So from a wealth management value proposition perspective, this will definitely play out different in the 2 businesses, as this value proposition needs to talk to the business model, the business support structure, as well as the licenses that is available to both these businesses. In my fold, there is a lot that you can be looking forward to, which you will be receiving in the near future. Now on the slide you will see in blue is the advice value proposition, and there's quite a lot of things that we will be delivering to you very soon. So the first one is advice categories. Now that's all the portions that you'll be able to give advice on that will play out in your practice. And we are also looking into perhaps how we can charge for advice going forward. Then we have the legal technical support, where all the legal advisors form part of Yolanda's team. So Yolanda and her team have a new value proposition, which is absolutely aligned with the advice strategy, and they will be sharing that shortly with you. On the business development side, that is the business management value proposition, talks back to the practice management in your practice. So here we will absolutely look at opportunities to grow your practice going forward. And then the last bit there is the knowledge management side of this proposition. And that will sit in the Institute of the Financial Planning business. So what you can look forward to here is definitely to understand your existing practice, to make sure that you have the competencies to attract new clients into your business going forward. So we are excited to launch the wealth management proposition to you today. So perhaps let me clarify what is meant by an investment value proposition. This is an end-to-end process, how investment advice is introduced to your practice and your clients' portfolios by way of an investment philosophy. How you articulate this value to your client and aligning your investment outcomes to clients' financial planning goals. The result of this will be that you will absolutely have an advice-led business. So, how will this proposition be supported? And how does that fit in with the current structure within MFP? So firstly, Momentum Investments is the product provider within this fold, and they will remain the people that will support you through Hugo Besaidnout and his team. They focus on technical investment aspects of all the Momentum products and funds. The wealth management team will assist to integrate all investment advice solutions which are aligned with investment advice processes, and only the implementation of that will be in a product or solution. The wealth management team will work closely with the regional team to support wealth creation, preservation and protection through several processes when financial advisors engage with their clients. So to share more about what you can expect, I would like to introduce Therese Grobler to you. She is the newly appointed Head of Wealth Management for MFP. Therese comes with a wealth of knowledge in the investment space and many years in the industry. Previously, she was part of the wealth management team in Consult. Apart from other tertiary qualifications, she holds a postgrad in financial planning as well as an advanced CFP designation in investment planning. Welcome, Therese, and with that, I'd like to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Sonia, and a warm welcome also from the wealth management team. The core focus of the wealth management team is to provide investment support and implementation of the wealth management value proposition and the solution to the Momentum Financial Planning distribution channel and the financial advisors. The team will align advisor practices with internal and house views to enhance the financial wellness and client-centric philosophy. I will shortly be introducing the team to you, who will support you from a regional perspective. In the meantime, let's look at the wealth management value proposition. The proposition consists of three equally important components: our philosophy, our investment strategy, and our investment framework. The wealth management philosophy is a set of beliefs and principles that shape our approach to investing. It's a roadmap that guides how we make investment decisions for our clients. We follow an outcome-based investment philosophy, which means we manage investments on behalf of our clients based on their unique return objectives, their risk tolerance, time horizon, their liquidity needs, estate planning, and tax considerations. To implement our outcome-based investing philosophy, we followed a three-tier approach in constructing and managing portfolios. We define a time horizon, we determine an acceptable level of risk, and we set a reasonable return target. This approach ensures a personalized strategy that increases the probability of clients reaching success. With this in mind, let's discuss our investment strategy. To assist you with choosing an appropriate investment portfolio, we have combined our investment philosophy and process into 5 defined investment strategies to ensure optimal outcomes for your clients. These 5 strategies are cash and income, short-term, medium-term, medium-long-term, and long-term. As you can see from the table, each investment strategy is linked to a specific investment return objective, a risk profile, and an investment time horizon to form the core of our investment strategy. The 5 defined investment strategies can be fulfilled by using approved single fund manager portfolios, model portfolios, and also the fund of funds from our house view list. The list will soon receive a new look, and we will be proud to share that with you shortly. Lastly then, the wealth management framework. We understand how difficult it is to choose the most appropriate investment solution from an often overwhelming universe of portfolios and products. According to the Association for Savings and Investments from South Africa, or as we call it, ASISA, there are over 3,000 South African rand-denominated portfolios that are available for investment. The wealth management framework provides a structured and a disciplined framework that has been purpose-built to assist you, the financial advisor, to further simplify the portfolio selection process so that you can make well-informed investment decisions on behalf of your clients. The framework is a selection of in-house solutions and externally managed collective investment schemes across both local and international mandates. Extensive fee negotiations are conducted within the portfolio selection process to ensure lower investment management fees are achieved for the benefit of your clients. The framework has been intentionally designed to align with your client's specific investment needs, while placing their risk appetite and their desired timeframe at the center of the investment process. The 5 investment strategies will soon be incorporated into the list for ease of reference. The wealth specialist will play a pivotal role in managing and integrating the various components of the wealth management framework. Let's look at the value proposition to you in more detail. They are custodians of the wealth management philosophy, and what this means is that they will uphold and implement the wealth management philosophy and ensure consistent application of the investment advice and processes across all businesses. The investment framework management, they oversee and connect all the elements of wealth management frameworks, drive the adoption of the house view fund list, supporting investment strategies and assisting with complex portfolio needs. Then managing strategic partnerships. They manage key partnerships with our strategic partners, including Equilibrium, Curate, Momentum Trust, and Momentum Securities, facilitating access to the full wealth value proposition and portfolio managers. Investment Information Hub. They serve as key connectors to the investment industry, managing relationships with product providers, asset managers, and fund managers. They influence due diligence processes and provide technical insights and support. They will implement standardized processes and best practices for delivering financial advice, ensuring alignment with the business advice strategy, regulatory requirements, industry standards, and organizational goals. So in summary, wealth specialists will enhance the value proposition by integrating investment strategies, providing industry insights, managing business processes, and supporting strategic partnerships, all while focusing on risk management within the MFP compliance framework. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sonia and Therese. I'm looking forward to partnering with you in this journey. Next, we have Flobella Yates, or as we all know her, Flof, who will discuss the alignment of the Momentum Focus Fund of Funds to the Equilibrium MFP focus models. Welcome, Flof.
Thanks, Hugo. Hello, everyone. I'm Flobella Yates, or Flof Yates, as most of you know me by, and I have the privilege of heading up the Equilibrium business. It's wonderful to be here and to be able to give you an update on the journey that we, as Equilibrium, began with MFP 4 years ago. This partnership essentially means that MFP now has its own investment team. As MFP advisors, you should see the Equilibrium team as an extension of your practice. We are your investment team. And as part of your team, we are here to ensure that we get our mutual clients to their investment goals. Although most of you already know the portfolio managers allocated to the MFP portfolios, today I thought I'd start off by introducing you to the rest of the team that manages your portfolios. As the MD of Equilibrium Investment Management, I have been so blessed in having recruited an A-class team who I trust implicitly to manage our clients' money with integrity and who are always focused on doing what's best for both advisors and clients. Kamini Naidu, as our Chief Investment Officer, is the custodian of our investment process, oversees the implementation of our philosophy, and chairs our investment committee. She has a background in alternative investments and brings with her a wealth of experience across both traditional and alternative asset classes, as well as public and private markets. You've all met our two phenomenal portfolio managers, Ronnie Boardman and Rupert Gissing. What you might not know is that they have spent the better part of the last 6 months aligning the two ranges of portfolios to ensure that they meet MFP's specific needs. But more about that later. Thokozani Zwane is the investment analyst behind the scenes, running the numbers, slicing and dicing them, and interpreting them in order to constantly manage the portfolios. He joined us from the Financial Services Conduct Authority and so also brings a regulator's view to our team. And if you see him around the office, you'll know that he always has a smile on his face. I wish I could be as calm and happy as he is all the time. Richard Stutley and Jade Koish are the two portfolio managers based in the United Kingdom that give us input on both the offshore portion of our local portfolios, but more importantly, manage MFP's offshore range. And then I'm sure you don't need any introduction to Jean Badenhorst and Tatiana Ronich, who've spent the last 2 and a bit decades engaging with managers and assessing their capabilities across various factors, including rating the people, the process, and the philosophy. A team that may be less well known to advisors is our research hive. Dr. Evan Gilbert and Eugene Buerter and their quantitative teams are an integral part of what makes us successful. Not only do they run the quants, but they also do a huge range of market and economic research designed at understanding any unintended consequences that we, as asset managers and advisors, utilize to make the investment journey as palatable as possible for clients. Because we know that keeping our clients invested is the best way to get them to their investment outcomes, it's important that we understand this research. As MFP, you are also supported by our distribution team, headed up by Pat Magadla, a seasoned investment distribution professional, and Matula Sikakana, who is not only your business development manager, but also busy with his second year of CFA studies. I often get asked by advisors why they should use a discretionary fund manager or multi-manager when they're able to select their own funds. So let's recap why I believe that Equilibrium adds value to your practice. Firstly, it's a partnership. We rely on you as the advisor to determine your clients' needs, time horizons, and to communicate the challenges in keeping them invested. Then, as your investment team, we build portfolios that align to those needs. It's not a case of us trying to shoehorn you into a product that might or might not suit your needs. As an independent discretionary fund manager who's been doing this for the past 16 years, we have a wealth of experience both locally and internationally. We cover over 1,000 local funds and over 20,000 global funds. So you can rest assured that we have a thorough understanding of the drivers of return in your portfolios, as well as a deep insight into where the risks lie. We actively manage the funds, and you know that by using us, you are not going to be in a position where you're going to be called to stand in front of the regulator to defend why you, as an advisor, selected a fund with an inexperienced team, or where you can't defend a position in a particular credit instrument, or worse still, where the fund's gone under. The benefits of our partnership is that we remove the investment compliance burden and advice risk off you and your practice. But there are so many other benefits. We simplify the investment process for you, professionalize your practice, and create efficiencies that help free up your time, enhance the value of your practice, and make succession planning so much easier. and we use our full assets under management to negotiate preferential pricing with the underlying asset managers, a benefit that accrues directly to your end clients. At this year's MFP conference, you may recall me mentioning that in addition to managing the MFP Focus model portfolio range, Equilibrium will also be taking over the management of the Momentum Focus Fund of Funds and aligning this range to your models. The MFP Focus model range was launched in March 2021 to meet MFP's stated objectives. The Fund of Funds, however, have been around for much longer and they were not launched for this particular purpose. So it meant that we needed to align the benchmarks, the outcomes, and the underlying constructs. Just to recap, the number in the models and in the Fund of Funds refers to the time horizon. So, for example, the MFP Focus 3 model portfolio and the Momentum Focus 3 Fund of Funds, the number 3 refers to a 3-year time horizon. But the benchmarks and the constructs of the Fund of Funds weren't aligned to your specific MFP outcomes. We had to rectify that. So since November last year, we have been on a process to align the Fund of Funds to the models, and this takes time. In November, we started with the underlying constructs, and what we did is we aligned the equity building block in both the Fund of Funds and the models to look the same in terms of underlying managers. Then we moved on to changing the benchmarks. Now, in the Fund of Funds, we need to ballot in order to do this. I'm delighted that the results are back and we have approval to change the benchmarks, so they too will be aligned to the CPI plus 2, 3.5 and 5 outcomes that MFP asked us to model for. And the last bit was the aligning of the offshore. You may recall that the models were underweight offshore because we needed to manage the CGT implications of making too many changes, and we were waiting for the launch of the feeder fund so that we could move out of the MGIM Global Growth Fund to the new combination of the Curate SU Fund, managed by Robeco, and Coronation's Emerging Market Fund. Again, this is now ready and we are busy with the transition over 3 tranches. This should be finished before the end of this month. Details of the Fund of Fund benchmark changes, the final manager lineup, as well as any other changes will be included in your quarterly report. You will also notice that there have been some changes to the latest MDDs to reflect this alignment. So what does all of this mean for you, the MFP advisor? Both ranges are now aligned and managed by one combined and independent team. You now get the benefit of deciding which execution makes the most sense for your clients. If CGT is the most important factor, you'll probably use the Fund of Funds execution. But if the client wants the look-through that the models give you, then the models might be a better option. Remember that we are your investment team. Please lean on us for support and information. We are here to ensure our mutual clients get to their investment outcomes. Both ranges are now aligned and managed by one combined and independent team. You now get the benefit of deciding which execution makes the most sense for your client. If CGT is the most important consideration, then you'll probably use the Fund of Funds. But if the client wants the look-through that the model provides, then the models might be a better option. This partnership means that we are your investment team. Please lean on us for support and information. And thank you for being such amazing partners. We are here for your journey and your clients' end success.
Thanks, Flof. It's certainly positive to see we are moving to a world where the selection of the solutions are simpler as they are aligned in terms of outcomes being targeted. Up next is Ray Mere, CEO of Curate, our brand new asset management capability. We are extremely excited about bringing this to market. Ray, I look forward to seeing what's on offer.
Thank you, Hugo, and good day to everyone. I am very proud and happy to be standing before you, launching South Africa's newest asset management firm, Curate Investments. When we thought about the name Curate, we thought, what is it that we do and how can we incorporate that into our name? So for example, the term curate means to take care of or find the absolute best of something and put it on display. And it works so well when you link it to what we do as a business, particularly when you think about the in-sourced asset management strategy. But before I get into Curate, let me tell you a bit about myself. I am Ray Mere. I've been in Momentum now for, well, that's actually a good story. I'll tell you about that just now. I've been in the industry for about 15 years. Started off at Allen Gray, where I did 10 years in multiple roles from distribution, operations, and management, and then joined Momentum in 2020 in the distribution space. I left briefly when I was going to study at Oxford, joined another firm in Cape Town because my family relocated, and then joined back into Momentum Group in February 2023 to launch this business. Today I'm going to take you through who we are as a business, what we hope to achieve, and the value that we're going to give to you as financial advisors. So I spoke to you about the name Curate and where it comes from. What's also fantastic is we dusted off a tagline called The Art of Investing, which actually, I think it belonged to Advantage or some other business that we used to own back in the day, and we've now incorporated it into Curate, again, playing with the art theme. And if you can see what we've done with art, and I mean, what art does when you play it along asset management, it's almost a juxtaposition between art and science. And you'll see a lot of the branding and everything that we do now has some sort of element of art in it, and hence the name Curate as well. But there'll be another session where we'll take you through the brand, but I thought I'd share that with you because I love the way the brand looks, and it's going to be very fresh in an industry that is very hard with lines and graphs, whereas we've come in with a much softer approach, and I'm hoping an approach and a brand that your clients will love as much as we do. In terms of narrative, you'll find that with Curate we talk about a lot about people. Asset management is the business of trust, and trust is between people. So when we think about people, we think that it's important to always remember that our clients have given us their hard-earned money and they've trusted us to take care of it, to protect it, to grow it. The underlying managers that we deal with, we trust them to take care of our clients' money. The financial advisors trust us to do the same for their clients, and ultimately the team in Curate as well. We're a team of human beings, we're people, and everything that we do is about people. And you'll hear that narrative more and more and more, and how do we take care of our clients' wealth. Next, just to share some principles in terms of what we're trying to achieve as a business. What is that value proposition that Curate has? So firstly, we have a global reach. What that means is we've researched the whole world. We've scoured the world to find some of the best investment managers that we can bring back to South Africa. Locally, you'll see I'll share with you what the local range of funds is. Globally, there's also some exciting managers that are coming to South Africa as part of the Curate brand as well. Simplicity is key. I've mentioned that it's all about people. And if you think about our industry, very much lots of jargon, lots of complicated terms like inverted yield curves and if this happens or what happens with the stock market, when actually ultimately what a client wants to know is how's their money doing, where is it invested, and is it going to do what it says on the tin? Are they protected as investors? And that's what we want to offer. We want to offer you and your clients simplicity in how we perform, simplicity in how we communicate with you, so that the journey for a client has a lot less unexpected turns, I suppose. Excellence is in the managers that we select. We choose, like I said, the very best managers around the world, and then we showcase them, hence the name Curate, and then relevance. Being a brand like ours, which you can see is very much retail focused, but also in the institutional space, you want to make sure that you're hitting the mark with what your clients' needs are. Start with your clients. You'll be able then to select what they need, and then select the right funds, or at least agree which funds to start off with, select the right managers to take to those clients. And we consider ourselves very much a client-centered brand in the investment industry. This is what I meant about where are we in the world. So we've chosen managers both in Johannesburg, South Africa, Lorium, Sesfikile, Visio, and Momentum Fixed Income locally. Globally, you can only see Robeco there. You'll know that we already have a partnership with Robeco in a multi-managed space. It made sense for us to take over the existing funds in the global space because they are single managed and Curate is a single manager. And then I cannot wait to tell you more about the managers that we found in the US, 2 in the US, 1 in Boston, 1 in New York, and 1 in Oxford in the UK. Brilliant names, brilliant managers, amazing track record. We're just waiting for finalization from a regulatory approval perspective before we can talk about them. But I can promise you that you're going to be very excited about these names. And interestingly, they're very excited to come to South Africa. They've never been in South Africa. They've never had this market opportunity. So the partnership works very well for us. And you'll be happy to know as well that we have exclusivity for usage of these managers in South Africa. Now, why is simplicity important? Why is it that Curate exists? Why is it that we believe that we've kind of plugging a hole somewhere within this industry? So if you look in South Africa, there's now been this massive expansion in the number of unit trust funds that there are. I mean, it's close to 2,000 unit trust funds if you don't even count all the different multi-manager and all the other kind of funds that you get out there. Now, how is a client or a financial advisor who still picks their own funds going to sift through all of that to find exactly the right funds for their clients? Well, the solution is us. It's Curate. Our job is to research. Our research teams will look at all of these managers, all the funds that they have, and see which ones fit our need, our narrative, and which ones will best give our clients the best outcome. If you take this further and you look globally, even worse. You've got over 100,000 funds that you have to look at. And again, the myriad of opportunity there. How will you select the best funds? Are they regulated? Can you use them in South Africa? All of that makes it even more complicated. And I think by, again, Curate's responsibility or our value proposition to you is we're going to go through that list of managers. We're going to select the right managers and we're going to bring them to you so that you don't have to do all that work. In terms of how do we select those managers, this manager selection process, I've said a lot about a couple of things. So one, it's not just about the numbers, it's also about the people. So we select managers that are top performers, individuals with the highest levels of integrity and committed to delivering results for our investors. Every manager is held to the same high standards, no matter where in the world they are. And it's been interesting having those conversations. They appreciate the fact that we have these high standards. We're very comprehensive in our evaluation. We also look at, as I mentioned, not just the qualitative, but also the quantitative. We'd go visit these managers wherever they may be to do due diligence and to make sure that they do exactly what they say they do. So in this approach of identifying unit trusts that will meet our investors' specific objectives, we start by finding managers who have demonstrated their ability to deliver on those goals through rigorous quantitative screening, including portfolio holdings analysis, risk and liquidity analysis, and also obviously performance analysis. After formatting a short list, we go beyond the numbers and then we start analyzing each manager's people and business. What's important here is you need to think about what is their philosophy, what is the process that they undertake. Do they behave the same way regardless of market conditions? We also visit these managers. And the visit it's almost like kicking the tires. You wouldn't buy a car without seeing it. You want to go visit their offices, want to understand the team dynamics, you want to make sure that it's not a one-man shop, you want to make sure that they're well equipped operationally, financially, to be there for the long run, because these are long-term relationships. We then select the best individuals to partner with us on each of our funds, establishing long-term partnerships and will deliver results for our investors. Finally, we have to monitor these managers. You can't just appoint them and leave them. So on a regular basis, they send us their performance figures, they send us the changes in their funds, attribution analysis, and then also have conversations with them on a regular basis as well. So you would have seen a launch note or email on the 1st of August showcasing who we are, what we've done, and everything that I've mentioned so far. You also would have seen the list of funds that we launched with. Now remember, that's just a launch range of funds. As soon as we launched, we already got into the second stage of thinking about what else do financial advisors need, and your feedback is actually going to be very important to us. So please be in touch and let us know what other funds you require. But before I get carried away in terms of the future, let's focus on what we've got today. And you would have seen the communication based on this. We've selected a local range of funds which consists of income funds, capital growth funds, and global funds. In terms of the income funds, you would have seen what we did there was we did look at third-party managers, we researched the income space, but we always came back to Ian Scott and the Momentum Fixed Income team. There was no need for us to look outside of the group to find any other fixed income team. Why? Because the team has done phenomenally well. They've been around for a long time. They've got an amazing track record. And actually, fixed income is well suited to be held in a large financial services business such as ours, because Ian and team have find opportunities around the country that other people don't get just because of the way we manage capital within the Momentum group as a whole. Our capital growth range of funds will comprise of the Curate Equity Fund, managed by Laurium, who currently manage about 56 billion in AUM and have been around since 2008. From a property perspective, it was crucial for us to play in this space. I think property plays a significant role in any client's portfolio, and there we selected Sesfikile Capital. They are currently sitting at 16 billion and is an organization that was started in 2010. For our balance fund, which I'm very excited about, we selected Visio. Visio is 28 billion AUM currently and has been around since 2003. Also, again, a team, all three of these managers, fantastic track record, fantastic teams, great people. Now, in terms of the global range, I spoke to you about what we've got lined up for you. So the ones that you do know is Robeco. Robeco was managing the Momentum Systematic Equity Fund and the Momentum Global Emerging Market Fund. Now, again, because we're the single manager business now within the group, there's no need for us to try and find anyone else to do that. So what we did was simply rebrand the Momentum Systematic Fund and the Momentum Emerging Market Fund to Curate Systematic and Curate Emerging Market Funds, managed by Robeco. Robeco, as you know, one of the oldest fund managers in the world, currently at 181 billion euros in assets under management, very well respected, and probably the best systematics manager in the world. The other equity funds that I spoke to you about are going to be thematic. It's going to be a global growth fund, a global value fund, and a global quality fund. 3 fantastic managers, as I mentioned, 2 in the US, 1 in the UK, and I can't wait to introduce them. And they'll be visiting us quite shortly once the funds are approved, and we'll bring them to you. We'll showcase them to you. Cool. So now I've told you about the funds, and there'll be a lot more detail that we have to give you, but I thought just to share with you the basics for now. But what does all of this mean for you and your clients? Well, the idea of launching Curate was, as I mentioned at the beginning, is we certainly don't want to compete internally, and we see Curate as a complementary to our existing capabilities in the multi-management space. You are very familiar with our multi-managed range of funds, and you're also very familiar with Equilibrium, the DFM that we have. What Curate offers is the single managed solutions. Some of them will be in the multi-managed solutions, some of them will be in Equilibrium's solutions. But what it also does, Curate gives you the opportunity to give your client something extra over and above that. So almost like a core and satellite approach. If your core is a multi-managed solutions or a model portfolio capability, and you're sitting in front of a client who wants more offshore exposure, and you can't do that through a model portfolio, obviously, because it's managed centrally. This allows you to go into the Curate space and look at our global equity funds and just add it to your model portfolio. If you're looking at someone who's underweight property, you can add the Curate Property Fund. That's, I would suggest, is probably how I see ourselves adding and complementing to the suite of funds that you have for your clients and also your client portfolios. So after our conversations with Sonia and Hannes, the Curate funds will also be part of your house view, and we see this as an additional option for you in your advisory proposition. This approach not only enriches the portfolio choices, but also simplifies decision making based on client requirements, offering a more cohesive investment experience. Furthermore, it's important for you to meet the Curate team. Let me showcase who we've got. So I'm responsible for the business. Natalie Harrison, who you all know, previously was responsible for distributing MGM in South Africa. She is now the head of distribution for the whole of Curate, and that includes both offshore and global. In her team, she's got Odrile and Kosana, our 2 fund specialists, one based in Pretoria, the other one based in Johannesburg, and we're currently recruiting for 2 more people in Durban and in Cape Town. Why these specific regions? We made a concerted and deliberate choice to make sure that we can mirror your various regional centers, and that means you're going to have someone dedicated to you in each of these regions, and we'll work quite closely with your teams to make sure that you get the information that you and your clients require. My promise as well to MFP was we're going to create content and collateral for you to use when you're talking about Curate. Our job is to assist you to have those conversations with your clients, to help your clients stay the course and hopefully achieve their financial goals, because they know exactly what to expect, and our funds will hopefully perform in line with their expectations. That is it from me. I'd like to thank you for your time, and I look forward to meeting all of you in person as we travel around the country, taking out our proposition. I see the relationship between Curate and Momentum Financial Planning as one of collaboration and partnership. Whatever you need from us, please feel free to get in touch. I look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Wow, I love what you've done with the branding, and the mandates are great. I can't wait to see your business grow. I will now hand over to our economist, Sanisha Pakrasamy, who will unpack how the global axis of influence is shifting.
Thank you, Hugo, and thank you for joining us. In a year witnessing an unprecedented number of general elections, the surge in protectionist measures, social unrest, and geopolitical turmoil has intensified. These conditions are enabling populist movements to solidify their foothold. Economic woes like rising inflation, slowing growth, have magnified long-standing grievances, particularly distrust in institutions that was simmering even before the COVID-19 pandemic. While immigration, race and religion will remain focal points of populist agendas, the current socioeconomic strain, worsened by high living costs due to conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, have heightened dissatisfaction with the incumbent governments. This year's extensive election schedule has already shown a continued populist trend, with similar shifts likely in upcoming elections. There's been a global departure from traditional centrist politics as fringe voters become more hostile to democracy. The Economist publication argues that this leaves the moderate centre lacking conviction. Radical and populist leaders have filled this gap, bringing passion and intensity that have shifted the political landscape. They have successfully lured disenfranchised voters seeking an alternative to long dominant centrist parties. While centrist parties struggle to counter the fear and anger that dominate the political discourse today, politicians on the extremes promise simpler solutions to more complex problems. Populist leaders may win public favor, but their rule often results in increased gender, ethnic, and income inequality. The hierarchical nature of populist parties, which prioritizes charismatic leaders over strong organizations, makes them vulnerable to foreign interference. Weak legislative oversight allows executives to bypass constraints, impacting both formal institutions like judiciaries and informal checks such as the media and civil society. In its most extreme form, this concentration of power facilitates severe abuses, targeting opponents and undermining democratic principles. This trend has even extended to some of the wealthiest democracies. For decades, Western political systems have featured dominant centre-left and centre-right parties or coalitions that supported the basic tenets of liberal democracy, while differing on specific issues. The main divide has been economic, with centre-left parties favouring more government spending and trade union alliances, and centre-right parties leaning towards market-oriented, private sector-friendly policies. Yet, recent elections progressively reveal that this long-standing centre-left and centre-right dominance is losing its grip. The rise of fringe parties has carried into 2024, with populist movements now making significant inroads into developed markets, regions historically known for their established political norms, strong institutions, and stable macroeconomic policies. This is likely due to the global cost of living crisis, which was initially triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, The Economist's review of past pandemics indicates that they typically result in increased inequality. 5 years after a pandemic begins, Gini coefficients usually stay around 1.25% higher than pre-crisis levels. Now, true to this pattern, the COVID-19 pandemic led to greater income inequality, fueling the rise of populist movements as voters lost patience with existing governments. With the global axis of political influence shifting, these political changes could result in policies that hinder exports and drive inflation higher. This is likely to be accompanied by increased market volatility as these risks draw more attention from market participants. In its most extreme form, populism can endanger democracy, deepen social divisions, and undermine trust in government. In the United States and Europe, traditionally seen as bastions of democracy, the upcoming year is shaping up to be particularly risky politically. The post-World War II order that has supported the West for 8 decades could be seriously threatened if former President Donald Trump wins a second term this November. Risks include widespread tariffs, a shift towards protectionism, a state that is more politicized, the withdrawal of support for Ukraine, and a weakening of NATO. The Bank of America Merrill Lynch Fund Manager Survey indicates record concerns among global fund managers about government debt. Further tax cuts could imperil America's fiscal health, especially if Republicans secure a sweeping victory in the White House and in both houses of Congress. If Trump's trade policies are enacted, growth in many emerging markets, which increasingly rely on an open world, will be negatively affected. The past decade in American politics has been marked by a decline in political tolerance and a surge in social media disinformation. The partisan divide between Democrats and Republicans has grown wider and even more venomous, with an increasing willingness to use physical force. Incidents like the January 6th attack on the US Capitol in 2021 highlight this trend. More recently, Donald Trump survived an apparent assassination attempt at a rally in Pennsylvania. A June survey from the University of Chicago found that 10% of American adults support violence against Trump. This support is rooted in a distrust of the establishment, and conspiracy theories spread on social media. The advances of right-wing parties in the European parliamentary elections underscore the rising tide of populism. Across Europe's major nations, centrist parties are being outmaneuvered by their far-right counterparts. In Germany, the centre-left Social Democratic Party, currently leading the federal coalition, came in third, trailing both the centre-right Christian Democrats and the far-right Alternative for Germany. While it was the far right that initially harnessed the backlash against free market capitalism and hyper-globalization post the 2008 financial crisis, leftist parties are now better positioned, as seen in France. President Emmanuel Macron's centrist coalition was decisively defeated in the first round of parliamentary elections by Marine Le Pen's far-right National Rally. However, the far left gained ground in the second round by uniting before the vote. France's weak culture of political compromise faces a test, as voters have elected a fragmented assembly divided into 3 blocs with none holding a majority. Macron has 3 main options to resolve the hung parliament: forming a coalition government with pro-European parties, establishing a minority government with the left-wing alliance, or appointing a technocratic government until another election can be held. While technocrat governments can provide stable governance by focusing on pragmatic solutions rather than partisan interests, it can also carry risks for the functioning of a democracy. In the United Kingdom, the new Prime Minister Keir Starmer of the Labour Party projects an image of a more stable government. British foreign policy pillars are likely to be upheld, including support for Ukraine and the Anglo-American relationship. Nonetheless, we expect more activism in other areas. Labour aims to cultivate warmer ties with the European Union concerning things like food trade, education, and security without actually rejoining the EU. They also plan to enhance relations with the Global South while reviewing consumer goods trade with China. However, as the New York Times highlights, Labour's landslide win wasn't a straightforward shift in the political landscape, with lower voter turnout and Labour garnering 17,000 fewer votes than they did in 2019, which gave the populist right a notable foothold. Latin America's populist resurgence and recent Asian electoral shifts reflect global democratic changes. However, success stories of centrism and united oppositions challenging illiberal populism offer hope. Take Poland. A diverse coalition ousted right-wing populists, restoring democratic norms. This could set a precedent for other nations grappling with authoritarian leadership, like Hungary or Turkey. Greece's moderate prime minister reversed radical left populist rule, a testament to the resilience of centrist governance and global political shifts. Moreover, Hungary's recent European parliamentary setbacks for Viktor Orban hint at shifting tides. Despite maintaining a strong grip for 14 years, the rise of a new centre-right opposition party poses a credible challenge in the upcoming 2026 national elections. The resurgence of populism in Latin America reflects wider shifts in democratic governance. Claudia Sheinbaum's landslide victory in Mexico, backed by the populist legacy of former President López Obrador, solidified the left's dominance. Meanwhile, Argentina faced political upheaval with the election of right-wing leader Javier Milei as president last November. In Venezuela, opposition leader Maria Corina Machado was barred from appearing on the presidential ballot, but she has managed to unite a long-fractured opposition coalition that once ostracized her. What's more is that she's built a powerful, energized citizen movement that hasn't been witnessed since the 1990s. Across in Asia, India's Narendra Modi faced political shifts as his Bharatiya Janata Party lost its parliamentary majority when it failed to achieve a predicted electoral landslide. His party now requires coalition agreements with political rivals to maintain governance under a centre-right framework. A strong showing of support for the opposition has put a stop to the slide towards authoritarianism, despite official media limiting the amount of airtime opposition leaders received. The Guardian has noted escalating tensions between the United States and China, suggesting that unlike the Cold War, today's conflict is influenced by deep economic ties and the emergence of middle powers like Russia, India, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and even Brazil. These nations often balance economic relations with China alongside security partnerships with the US. While China delights in the grimness of America's political predicament, both Democrats and Republicans harbor skepticism about China's ascent, viewing it as a challenge to US dominance and the global order. While both Biden and Trump advocate tariffs on Chinese goods, Trump's foreign policy remains unpredictable. Coming back home, the 2024 national elections represented a turning point in South Africa's political landscape. For the first time, the African National Congress, or ANC, did not secure a decisive majority, with its share of National Assembly seats reducing to 40% from a peak of 70% in 2004. This outcome highlights deep-seated public concerns about the effectiveness of our democratic system, which has often fallen short of expectations. South Africa's economic challenges since the global financial crisis have deepened unemployment and inequality. Despite the ANC's ambitious programs to enhance healthcare, transport, and utilities access, the quality of these services has deteriorated significantly. Corruption, patronage, and the blending of state and party roles have undermined key institutions. Failures in sectors like ports and railways, along with the collapse of state-run services, have further stifled growth, reduced tax revenues, and compelled repeated bailouts, imperiling fiscal consolidation and debt management. Democracy's ability to promote economic equality is being questioned in South Africa. Persistent inequality has heightened public disillusionment with the political system and threatens to corrode social unity. Dissatisfaction with the ANC's 30-year grip on power, South Africans are now pursuing cooperative approaches to tackle national issues. The 2024 elections saw the ANC lose majority control in 4 provincial legislatures, including vital economic hubs like Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, and the Western Cape, leading to the formation of a coalition government with 9 other parties. In South Africa, widespread dissatisfaction due to government's failure to address socioeconomic inequalities and fulfill promises of inclusive prosperity has fueled a surge in populist support, as evidenced by the increased support for parties like the Cape Coloured Congress and the Patriotic Alliance. Leaders such as Julius Malema of the Economic Freedom Fighters and Jacob Zuma of the Umkhonto we Sizwe Party have capitalized on these grievances, offering transformative solutions to disillusioned voters. The Progressive Caucus, which includes the EFF and the MK Party amongst others, opposing the government of national unity provides essential political competition to prevent economic benefits from favoring only the elite. However, divisive racial politics could perpetuate historical, social, and economic divisions instead of bridging them. Moreover, calls to abandon the Constitution will not resolve South Africa's core issues of poverty and inequality, and instead risk undermining the country's constitutional foundations. In our view, the new cabinet and parliamentary working committees have resulted in broadly positive changes, including continuity in the finance and electricity ministries. With the disbanding of the Department of Public Enterprises, state-owned entities will temporarily report directly to the presidency, allowing for continued reforms at Eskom and Transnet, which are crucial to revitalizing growth in South Africa. We anticipate that business and consumer confidence will rise in hopes of continued structural reforms, leading to a better economic path as accountability and governance improve and as policy and reform continuity prevail. Nevertheless, the path ahead remains politically challenging and depends on productive conflict resolution methods to resolve disputes between partners participating in the government of national unity to positively impact government's ability to deliver on socio-economic reforms. South Africa has now entered a phase where collective decision-making is crucial for effective governance. As such, the stability of the incoming government will hinge on shared goals, equitable power distribution, and the political maturity of the represented parties in Parliament. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sanisha. We certainly look forward to the year ahead. It's imperative for business and consumer confidence to rise. We are seeing green shoots in the structural reforms and the GNU as it relates to accountability and governance, which I hope continues to go from strength to strength. Next up will be Ian Scott, our head of fixed income, who will discuss the interest rate cycle and what impact it will have on the solutions. The stage is yours, Ian.
Thank you, Hugo. Good day, everyone. When we talk around fixed income markets today, I think our topic is very relevant. We've been in a hiking cycle, now a long neutral cycle over 22, 23, and now we're finally getting to that cutting cycle. So what does it actually mean for the fixed income asset classes? As always, where's the globe? We've got to find out what's happening in the world in fixed income. Firstly, inflation has been falling quite dramatically from those very high levels in 22, down in 23, even more down in 2024. But what's happening? The central banks are basically staying at those very elevated levels of interest rates. Why? Because one, growth is not too bad in developed markets, and I'm putting an asterisk on it, we'll get to it, especially on the US, but they're keeping those high rates. Why? Because they really want to make sure inflation gets to that 2% target that they're all looking for. But that may only be out in 2025. So why cut rates now? But remember, when central banks cut rates, there's usually a 9 or a 12-month lag between cutting rates today to when it will actually hit the consumer in their pockets. Right, we'll get into it. So central banks are going to cut rates in 2024, but that process is going to take more time than we all think. It's going to be a much longer cycle, especially from the Fed. Yes, we have seen the ECB cut rates, because why? They are worried about growth in Europe. Yes, we've seen the People's Bank of China cut rates. Why? Because they are worried about the property market. They are worried about the consumer in China. The US is the interesting one. Yes, interest rates are very high, but growth isn't bad. And let's get into it. So, yes, the Fed has got extra time because of the growth in the economy. The jobs numbers stay high. The jobs numbers are important for the Fed because that's usually a signal or a flag, as we call it, for them to start the cutting cycle. while we're seeing the non-farm payroll numbers stay at elevated numbers, so every month 2, 3, 400,000 jobs being created, the Fed does not feel that pressure in the economy to cut rates yet, especially when inflation is still at 3%. Look, they want to get it down to 2, the jobs are okay, inflation at 3, no reason to cut rates yet. But it is going to change very shortly, and I think we also have to think, what does it mean for fixed income markets, but also for other asset classes. So we're waiting for the Fed, and we think that it's becoming more and more imminent that they will cut in the latter part of 24. Right. Second important thing is the yield curve in the US is still inverted, meaning the Fed funds is sitting up at 5.25, and then you've got the 2-year rate probably sitting around 4.30, 4.40, and you've got the 10-year rate probably sitting around 4.10, 4.15. Still very inverted. And you would go, but so what? Well, the so what is when the Fed will actually cut rates, those front-end rates will fall dramatically, and the long-end rates will only fall a little bit, normalizing the US curve. And you'll go, okay, but what does it mean? There's a lot of pent-up demand in the front end of the US curve looking for yield. But as long as that yield stays high in the US, there's no reason to go and hunt for it in other places in the world. Once you dramatically drop that rate, what happens? These investors say, look, I'm not earning enough money on my money market fund or on my bank account. Where's good yields? Well, where's good yields? Places like South Africa, Brazil. So when you get that normalization in the yield curve, we think that will be a good trigger or a flag for investors coming to invest in emerging markets. So the shape of the yield curve, critically important for what happens to South African yields. If we look at our own yields coming to the bank market, you can see it's gone up, obviously with the rate hiking cycle, and now it's flat. Okay, so the interbank market is saying to you, look, we're waiting for the SARB, what's going to happen? Well, for 8 meetings, nothing has happened, so what, we'll just keep the rates where it is. And you would go, okay, what does it mean for us? Well, it actually means that we can generate decent high yields for you in the front end of the curve. So quite important, especially for our money market fund and our enhanced yield fund, that those rates stay higher so we can have better rates for you. Right. What is the market actually pricing? Well, you can see this inverted curve now at the bottom, and it's moving high and high, high. What does it actually say? We call it the forward rate market, the market's expectation of what interest rates will be over the next year or more. And when the curve is invertedly sloped, like you can see now, then it means the market is expecting interest rates to be cut. By how much? Well, the market says it thinks the SARB can cut rates by around 50 basis points in 2024 and another 50 basis points in 2025. Now, we don't know exactly how it will happen. Will it be September or November, or will it be Jan or March? But somewhere between now and the middle of 2025, we can expect that interest rates will probably be around 100 basis points lower than where we are today. Good news for investors, especially when you've got duration asset classes and growth assets. So it's not specifically for your cash portfolio, but definitely for your equity portfolio, for your bond portfolio, this is good news. Right. What is happening in the bank funding curve is something very different than what I showed you in the interbank market. So the bank funding curve is also inverted, believe it or not. So banks are still paying us higher in 1-year rates than in 3-year rates. And you say, well, why? Well, it's just an anomaly in the curve that we think at this point in time. The benefit for you as investors is that you can have higher yields in your money market and enhanced yield funds than necessarily on long-dated bond funds. Interesting. We think it's an anomaly in the market, and we like to exploit it for our funds. When we come to duration assets, very, very different story. You could see we had a huge climb up that wall, 21, 22, and even in 23. Obviously, a lot of negative news around global bonds, the Fed, the SARB hiking, and negative views around South Africa. Once the election was announced, massive rally down. When yields go down to the bottom right, that's a huge rally. We had over 5% of capital appreciation in the nominal bond space in the space of 1 month. That's phenomenal, right? Suddenly, our 12% 10-year yields went all the way to sub 11. Can you believe it, in the space of 1 month? So for investors who stuck it out with my words over the last year or more, thank you for staying. And this was a huge ride. But we don't think it's over yet. Yes, the returns will probably not be the same as what we saw in June. But even at an 11% yield, we still think there's good opportunity in South African bonds. Why? Because one, inflation in 2024 is probably going to be around 5.1, 5.2%. And in 2025, probably around 4.5%. So when you can receive 11% in bonds and you get inflation at 4.5, well, 7.5, 8% real yields, that is not to be sneezed at. You want to have that in your portfolio. And it can even be a little bit spicier than that if you just add on that when the Fed cuts rates, we think there could be more juice into nominal bonds. So let's watch this space. We still like nominal bonds. When we look at the curve, you can still see, remember I said to you, the US curve was inverted. The short end is much higher than long end. Now the South African curve is obviously the normal way around, but it's very, very steep. All the way from the 7-8% in the front end, all the way to nearly over 12% in the long end. That's probably too steep. For an economy that's probably growing around 1% this year and maybe 1.5%, 1.7% in 2025 with 4.5%, 5% inflation. As much as that green line moved to the blue line, we think it can actually do a little bit more. So the steepness of the curve can move down, which will give you good capital gains in nominal bonds, as well as we think the curve can actually flatten. Why? Because we think there's going to be a budget surplus announced in the October medium-term budget by the Minister of Finance. But let's watch this space. We think there's good things on the horizon for nominal bonds. When we then look at where foreigners are, because remember the big story we've heard over the last 3, 4, 5 years is foreigners have been selling out our South African bonds, which is very true. We know that they've taken their holding from around 42% in 2018 to around 24, 25%. Yes, we have seen foreign buying in the South African bond market over the last couple of months, especially after the election. Why? Because there's investors out there saying, well, we think the risk premium is worth it now. We think the political premium is out of bonds. If we just look at the fundamental pricing, bonds look cheap. But it's typically those investors that's usually quick on the trade. So we find it's bank trading books, hedge funds, and a little bit of sovereign wealth funds that's actually been buying South African bonds, but it's not been a massive buying. They've only started to dip their toes. The real buyers have not entered the South African market. Now, as I said to you, when that US curve normalizes again, we will probably find that a lot of the real investors, the real pension funds in the world come and look for yield in emerging markets. And we think that South Africa will be a beneficiary of that trade. And you would probably find that investors then go to 25, 26, maybe more of the South African bond market. So another flag for us, quite important what the foreigners will do in our market. If we just move to the other asset class, inflation bonds. So you saw that very steep run down the hill with nominal bonds. Inflation bonds, not so much. They just basically traded sideways. So not a huge amount of capital appreciation in the inflation bonds, but now there's a big but, that the pricing looks very attractive here. Because those real yields at 5% looks very attractive to me if I look at it versus other duration asset classes. So we're getting to the point where for a long period of time you heard me saying that nominal bonds is so much cheaper than inflation linkers. That's the asset class to be in. We're starting to get to a point where, yes, nominal bonds are still cheap, we like it, but inflation bonds are now the standout asset class where we think is really cheaply priced. Because at 5% real, we are basically in equity territory. And we think there is a lot to go here, especially when the Fed cuts rates. You'll probably find that real yields unlock. So at the moment, the 10-year tips, the 10-year inflation linker is probably trading around 1.8%. But as soon as the Fed cuts rates, it unlocks the real rates. And suddenly you find that that real rate goes from 1.7, 1.8 to around 1.5, 1.4, maybe even lower. And that unlocks then the real rates in South Africa, which can then move from around 5 maybe to 460, 4.5. So we think there's a capital unwind that could happen here, but probably over the next year. So we like inflation linkers. The curve also very flat, right? So where do you want to be on a flat curve? You probably want to be more in the front end of the curves, where in nominal bonds we prefer longer dated because the curve is going to flatten. In inflation linkers, we think somewhere between the 8-year point and the 15-year point looks very attractive. 5% real yields, we think these should be in your portfolio. So definitely another asset class that we do like in the fixed income space. Right, so how do we put it all into one big basket? We say, well, what's the good and the bad in terms of our view? Well, what is making us smile at the moment is obviously inflation falling and growth also receding. That's good for bonds. I know growth receding sounds counterintuitive, but it is good for bonds. The fact that global central banks are going to cut rates, we've started to see it. The ECB, PBOC, the Fed will follow. Our own central bank will also follow. And then the last thing that makes us smile is, I said to you, the unwind of the curve. Very good for emerging markets when DM curves normalize. Monsters under the bed, what worries us is obviously the fiscal path. We really need to understand that government finances are on a better path. The Minister of Finance coming out saying, look, we're going to have a budget surplus and we're not just going to spend that surplus, we're actually going to use that surplus to cut some of the debt. We are worried that there could be some populism creeping into our system, but let's see. The GNU is brand new, so let's see what happens there. I think a big risk to the bond view is obviously poor performing SOEs, and now it's also munis, and that at one point they'll be forced into the hands of National Treasury to bail them out. I think we'll park it for there, but overall, still a very good story. We think there's good news for investors out there. Right, let's put it into numbers. So I said to inflation this year is around 5, next year around 4.5. So in cash, 8.5 to 9%, still looks attractive to us, but less so than a year ago. Credit will probably give us a very similar number because as rates fall, you probably find that the JIBAR unwinds, the attractiveness of credit becomes less in the investment grade space. The two asset classes then is obviously nominal bonds. I said to you probably 9-10% returns. That's really possible. And then the one we like is inflation bonds, where we think that there really could be upside to our upper limit at that 10% because you don't need much for real yields to unwind, and you could have very decent double-digit returns from that asset class. As we always say, I think there's good opportunities in this market, and I think for us, that's long-term investors, this is an opportunity that we should use. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Next, we are joined by Rupert Gissing, who co-manages the MFP Fund of Funds and model portfolios. He will discuss how important time is when investing in multi-asset solutions. Thank you for taking the time, Rupert.
Thank you, Hugo. Hello, everyone. Time is an important factor when investing because it allows you to benefit from compounding returns and the ability to tolerate more risk, which ultimately means more wealth accumulation as you continue to invest over time, regardless of market conditions. To quote the late Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's longtime business partner and vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, waiting helps you as an investor, and a lot of people just can't stand to wait. If you didn't get the deferred gratification gene, you've got to work very hard to overcome that. I thought it would be a good idea to have a look at the 12-month returns for the MFP focused model portfolios as at the end of June 2022 and compare it to the 12-month returns as at the end of June 2024. Recall that 2022 was an extremely volatile year for markets, fueled by the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, supply chain challenges, and the impact of the cost of living crisis on inflation and global monetary policy. As you can see, the difference is significant, and it's these periods of outperformance like we are currently seeing that contribute significantly to portfolios reaching their targets over their intended time horizons. This is, of course, part of our portfolio construction process, and as one can see in the following slide, we typically expect a wide range of possible outcomes over the first couple of years after the start of the investment. Returns for different asset classes can vary significantly over the short term, But as time progresses, we have a lot more certainty around outcomes and return possibilities. This illustrates the importance of staying invested irrespective of short-term market volatility and the perception of underperformance. This chart illustrates the typical behavior and expected outcomes of a portfolio with the strategic asset allocation of our Focus 7 model portfolio or fund of funds solutions. As time progresses, it stabilizes, and we've got much more certainty around possible outcomes as we get closer to the intended minimum investment horizon of the portfolio. As a reminder, Focus 7 is a real return target of CPI plus 5% over any rolling 7-year period. For example, after 1 year, possible returns can vary between a range as wide as a minimum of minus 30% to a positive return in the region of 50%. As time progresses, we get more certainty around outcomes, and the possible range of returns reduces and gets closer to the expected return target of CPI plus 5%. The following chart illustrates the same principle, but here we look at it from a different angle. We can see that the longer one stays invested, the higher the probability of reaching CPI plus 5%. For example, after 1 year, the probability is 59%, over 5 years it's 65%, and over 7 to 8 years there is a significant increase to 79% probability of reaching a return of CPI plus 5%. Of course, it is important to remember that there are no guarantees in investing, and there is always the probability of not reaching your intended investment outcomes. But the longer you stay invested and the more you allow the power of compounding to work in your favor, the closer you will get to the target. CPI plus 4% might mean that you haven't ultimately reached your goal, but it's much preferred outcome to reaching CPI plus 1% because you were concerned about short-term volatility and making hasty investment decisions driven by emotions and the urge for instant gratification. But you may ask yourself, why am I spending so much time discussing short-term portfolio volatility versus long-term return expectations? Well, we do sometimes see disinvestments from our multi-asset solutions based on short-term volatility, creating the perception of losses and underperformance. But as we can see, as we give time, investment outcomes more often than not improve significantly. So, turning our attention back to the short term, what has been happening in financial markets over the last quarter and how have our multi-asset solutions capitalized? We see the economic momentum of the first quarter of 2024 continued into the second, and the 3 months ending 30 June was another positive period for global equity markets. Initially, investors aggressively dialed back expectations for central bank rate cuts, as the US overheating worries that had taken root towards the end of the first quarter meant that strong April data was poorly received by markets, and the quarter got off to a bumpy start. But as it progressed, the worst of these worries abated and soft landing hopes revived. But nothing is free in this world, and the price of this continued economic growth was once again sticky inflation. As a result, markets still expect fewer cuts by Western central banks than they did at the beginning of the year. Against this resilient backdrop, major global equity indices advanced in the second quarter of 2024. The MSCI All Countries World Index, or ACWI for short, delivered a positive return of 2.9% in US dollar terms and minus 0.9% in rand terms, due to the offsetting effects of a strengthening rand. This was mainly driven by US tech euphoria, as companies exposed to artificial intelligence continued to outperform other areas of the market. The S&P 500 index reached yet another all-time high, up 4.2% for the quarter and 24% over the past 12 months. In China, moves by authorities to support the real estate sector provided a boost to Chinese equity markets, with the MSCI China index up 7.1% over the quarter in US dollar terms. However, this momentum faded somewhat in June amid ongoing challenges in the property sector and weaker domestic demand with consumers under pressure. The weight of Asian markets in the broader emerging market universe also meant that, despite lackluster returns in Latin America, emerging market equities outperformed their developed market counterparts to deliver quarterly returns of 5% in US dollar terms and 1.25% in rand terms. Conversely, global fixed income investors had to endure another quarter of negative returns, with the World Government Bond Index delivering negative returns of minus 1.6% in dollar terms and minus 5.1% in rand terms, as a strengthening rand exacerbated negative returns. Global property ended the quarter down 2.3% in dollar terms, delivering negative returns for the second quarter in a row. Global cash returned 1.3% over the quarter in US dollar terms. The strengthening rand detracted from returns for a rand return of minus 2.5%. Moving our focus to local markets, South African equities closed the second quarter of the year in positive territory. April started on a strong note as optimism over corporate earnings lifted domestic equities. In May, national elections took centre stage and the market-friendly outcome helped lift domestic equities higher. The capped Swiss All-Share Index closed the quarter 8.2% up. The SA-focused financial sector was the main driver of returns, up 15.9%. Industrials and resources delivered positive returns of 5.2% and 3.6% respectively. South African bonds, the asset class most sensitive to political risk, was the biggest winner on the back of the election outcome and the formation of the Government of National Unity. The market responded positively and bonds managed to record impressive returns in June, which translated to the second best quarter two returns for the asset class in more than 2 decades. The All Bond Index was up by 7.5%. As yields declined across the spectrum, bonds in the 12 plus years maturity spectrum gained the most, up a significant 9.9%, followed by 7 to 12 year maturities, up 8%. Back to our asset class returns. Local property also performed strongly in quarter two, up 5.7% for an annual return of 26%, making it the best performing domestic asset class over the period. It is, however, worth noting that all the growth occurred during June, driven by improved post-election sentiment. Returns in April and May were virtually flat. The South African Reserve Bank kept the repo rate unchanged at 8.25%, noting inflation risks to be balanced. The Steffi Composite returned 2% during the quarter for a total SA cash return of 8.5% over the last 12 months. After a volatile quarter, the rand gained significantly against the US dollar, strengthening by almost 4%. It is, however, also worth noting that the rand has still weakened by 8.6% against the US dollar over a 3-year period. Overall, the second quarter built on the successes of the first, with risk assets delivering another set of positive returns for investors. Let's now have a closer look at how our multi-asset house view solutions, the MFP focused model portfolios and the momentum focused fund of funds have performed. With the significant strengthening of the rand over the quarter that detracted from the local performance of all global asset classes, it was local assets that mainly contributed to returns. All portfolios benefited from the positive post-election sentiment and the ever-increasing expectation of a rates cut being just around the corner. Having higher fixed income exposure meant that both the focused 3 fund of funds and model portfolios performed very well relative to the other longer time horizon, more aggressively positioned solutions. In the momentum focus fund of funds, focus 3, 5 and 7 delivered returns of 3.9%, 4.3% and 4.3% for the quarter respectively. Turning our attention to the MFP focus model portfolios, the MFP focus 3, 5, 7 and 7 unconstrained model portfolios delivered returns of 4%, 4.7%, 4.4% and 4.5% respectively. All of the portfolios finished the quarter and last 12 months ahead of their CPI plus benchmarks, except for Focus 7 fund of funds that slightly underperformed the higher CPI plus 6 benchmark. 12-month returns for both sets of solutions are also in line with or better than the peer group, which also translates into improved numbers over longer time horizons. The focus model portfolios, now with a 39-month track record, have also had consistent performance ahead of the peer group since inception. With our re-optimized local equity building block now firmly in place in both sets of solutions for approximately 2 quarters, I thought it would be a good idea to unpack its performance in a bit more detail. As a reminder, the allocation to the underlying managers are as follows: 25% to the Net Group Investments SA Equity Fund, 25% to the Truffle SEI General Equity Fund, 20% to the 91 SA Equity Fund, 20% to the Fairtree Equity Prescient Fund, and 10% to the Momentum Trending Equity Fund. As we can see, relative to the capped Swiss index, it has outperformed by 2.1% over the past quarter, while it underperformed by 1.2% over the last 12 months. If we unpack the longer term performance of the local equity blend, we see outperformance over 3, 5, 7 and 10-year periods relative to the capped Swiss index, as at the end of quarter 2. But A snapshot of returns at a specific point in time is one thing and can vary significantly over time. If we however look at rolling 12-month returns relative to the capped SWIX, the focused local equity building block outperformed over 60% of the rolling 12-month periods over a 10-year time horizon, contributing to an average positive alpha of 2.6% per year. Our diversified construction and exposure to the different equity investment styles of value, quality and momentum means that we can capitalize on returns through different market cycles. Local equity as an asset class remains an important contributor to returns and achieving investment objectives over the solution's minimum recommended time horizons. Let's have a closer look at our current portfolio positioning from a tactical perspective for our multi-asset solutions. We make tactical asset allocation calls based on short and medium-term asset class views. Overall, we've got a moderate growth-orientated positioning, given the improved global economic outlook and imminent rate cuts. We are also shifting overweight local asset classes following the favourable election outcome and supporting fundamentals, but adequate diversification remains in place. We maintain our underweight position in property, both local and global. Even though we've seen attractive returns from the asset class recently, our concerns, including limited diversification possibilities, remain. Global equity remains a valuation story, and we saw recently that even the slightest disappointment from an earnings perspective from the tech-heavy hitters can have a significant impact on volatility. Therefore, we currently favour emerging market equities over developed markets, though we maintain our neutral position in developed market equities. Global cash also remains attractive, and we've maintained our overweight position as it continues to provide currency diversification and defensive benefits. Though we have seen good returns from equity over Q2, the asset class is still attractively priced, as one can see from the following chart. Though there has been a slight increase in PE ratios reverting to the long-term average of 16.4 over the last quarter, valuations remain attractive and well below the long-term average. We therefore maintain our overweight SA equity position. It is important to remember that the South African stock market is not the economy, as it is well diversified with a significant portion of earnings being generated outside of South Africa. With local elections now behind us and the overheating worries of April also appearing to be in the past, markets continue to grow more confident that the next move for central banks is to ease monetary policy rather than tighten it. Of course, everybody is keeping a close eye on the Fed, waiting in anticipation for the first cut to be announced as we navigate closer to the upcoming US elections. Thank you.
Last but not least is Richard Stutley, Portfolio Manager from Momentum Global Investment Management in London, who will provide us with a global update and why investors are all in on AI. Welcome, Richard. Please take it away.
Hello there, and thank you very much for joining us for this quarterly update. Of course, if you have any feedback, please share that with me or one of the team. Okay, moving straight in then. I think I've shown this chart previously, probably in the last recording. I'll describe where markets are currently as an everything rally. What do I mean by that? Well, look at the grey columns on this chart. That's performance to the end of June 2024 and over the last 18 months or so. And what you'll see across these asset classes, beginning with equities on the left-hand side, through the bond complex, which is somewhat in the middle, and through to commodities on the right-hand side, all of those grey columns are pointing up. Hence, as I say, an everything rally. It's similar when you look over approximately the last 8 months or so, since October 2023. Again, all of those lighter blue columns pointing up. Year to date then, a little bit more dispersion, and that's the darker blue columns, as you'll see, and that's showing that equities, yes, they're up. Bonds, however, not doing as well. So the third set of columns, that's the JP Morgan Government Bond Index, GBI, Government Bond Index. That's down for the year, but elsewhere, a similar pattern, lots of asset classes moving higher. That said, continue to look at the left-hand side, DM equities, developed market equities, the clear winner, not only year to date, but over all of these time periods. Actually, however, when you look beneath the surface of those developed market equities, and you'll know this, hence the title of my presentation on AI, artificial intelligence, there's only really been one theme. It has been about excitement, about artificial intelligence. And so what we see here, because we're tracking some of the major equity market indices, you've got in dark blue the S&P 500, you've got in lighter blue the NASDAQ, but what's way out in front? Way out in front is this US semiconductor and semiconductor equipment index, and that is tracking what is currently the real focal point of this AI revolution, and that is people delivering these high-end computer chips in order to power artificial intelligence software. So that green line has been going through the roof, as you can see. There is more of this green line, more AI within the NASDAQ. So the NASDAQ is ahead of the S&P 500. But the S&P 500, if you compare that, that's the darker blue line, if you compare that against the red line, which is the S&P 500, but on an equal weighted basis, you'll see how significant this theme has been to the overall headline return of the index. Equal weight all of the constituents, you get the red line, you get significantly less, and that is because what's been powering the S&P 500 is this AI theme. Now, one has to acknowledge, I say AI in terms of share price returns doing really well. Let's acknowledge that in terms of business fundamentals, AI, that sector, has been doing really well. What are we showing here? Well, we're showing the last 6 quarters. We're showing the last 6 quarters, and the metric we're looking at is return on assets. If you can produce a decent amount of profit for the cost of your assets in your business, if you can do that, then ultimately you will be a fast growing company. So that's a great metric to track in terms of business performance. And what we're tracking in the columns here is each of the 11 sectors in not only the Russell 1000, which is the largest 1000 companies on the US stock market, but also we're looking at each 11 sector in the Russell, each 11 sectors in the Russell 2000. So that's slightly smaller companies, the next 2000 companies after the largest 1000. So we're looking at all of those sectors, and we're just highlighting where, in terms of that metric, return on assets, where has the Russell 1000 tech sector, that's dominated by AI, where has that been performing over the last 6 quarters? Well, you can see it's either first, second, or third across all of these 6 quarters. So without question, these AI companies are performing extremely well. But, and you can imagine there's a bit of a punchline here, growth isn't everything as it says in the title. What this chart here is very simplistically trying to pick up is that ultimately what you pay for companies matters. So it's great to have growth, but if you are paying a lot for companies, that is going to translate into a lower dividend initially, and we see that here. If we look at the section that says Russell 1000 Tech, you can see that your starting dividend is only 53 cents. Now compare that to another sector, a sector that is growing significantly slower in the form of the Russell 1000 industrial sector. It's only growing, you can see there, 3.4%. That's the table at the bottom. Contrast that with the 9.4% growth of that Russell 1000 tech sector. So it's growing a lot more slowly. But look at the starting dividend. Because you are paying less, you're collecting a dividend that is nearly 3 times higher. What happens? You've got these 2 competing forces. You've got in the top there, the tech companies growing very fast, but they are expensive. You're collecting a low starting dividend. You contrast that with the industrials companies growing more slowly, but you collect a higher initial dividend because you pay less at the outset. Which of those 2 outcomes is better? Well, we have to make a lot of assumptions here, and hence this really is just for illustrative purposes. But ultimately, when you look at these 2 tables and look at the present value I've calculated for them, well, with respect to tech, it's $95. With respect to the industrials companies, it is $99. $9. What it is picking up, as I say, is that what you pay at the outset does matter. This is crucial. I think we all know this. And that's really come to light recently. If you think where we are at the time that I'm recording this, we're at the start of the third quarter of 2024, and we've seen at the start of this quarter a dramatic rotation out of some of those more expensive names linked to that AI theme and into other companies which actually, yes, they've got lower growth, but actually they look more reasonably priced. So as it says, growth isn't everything. What are we picking up on this chart? Well, if you look at the right-hand side, you should recognize what are currently the largest public companies in the world, dominated by the US, dominated by technology. But what is this table trying to show? What it's trying to show by looking at each of the last decades, going back through time to the 80s, it's just demonstrating that as good as these companies are, as insurmountable as the so-called economic moats that exist around these businesses, the one constant here is change, i.e. that the companies that were the biggest ones 10 years ago are typically not the biggest ones today. So yes, there are some great companies today. Yes, everyone has that fear of missing out, but bear in mind, if history is a guide, it is unlikely that the biggest companies you see today will still be the biggest companies 10 years from now. And it's really for the next 10 years that we're investing. We're not trying to pay too much attention to what's already happened. If we think then about Q2, because there's a quarterly update, a lot of things worked in the portfolios. That's what I'm picking up here. You can see global developed market equities in Q2 did 2.7%. We've got a reasonable amount of exposure to Japan. Japan didn't do very well during that quarter, but over the last 12 months, our Japanese equities have done 25% ahead of the 24% return on the S&P 500. So that's been working for us. When it comes to the next column, if you can see next to global developed markets, that's loans, we've called it there, doing 1.9%. That's essentially everything that is more private in nature and that is typically floating rate. And so in there, we've got some asset-backed securities. They did 2.8% during the quarter. We've got some contingent convertible bonds, which you might have heard about. They did 1.9% during the quarter. EM corporate bonds, again, doing 1.7%. And that contrasts with the right-hand side of this chart, which shows that things like your traditional investment grade didn't do as well. Things like your government bonds on the far right-hand side didn't do as well. So instead, owning the areas we did within that loan space, that again was a good thing. Finally, on the right-hand side, I've just identified that we own quite a lot of inflation-linked treasuries, and they did well, up 0.8%. However, we've got all those things working. What didn't work was our DM equity manager performance, and that is because they did not have ultimately enough of that aforementioned AI theme. And I go back to the fact that we are now seeing a rotation. Who knows how long it will continue, but that should be, for all of us, a reminder that we don't want to have too much in a single theme, even a theme as exciting as AI. Final point I'd pick up on this chart here is global government bonds, as I say, doing poorly. Yes, we've tried to diversify that into things like TIPS, but we do still have quite a lot of them, and therefore you see that in the performance of our cautious fund. It has a lot of government bonds. It was therefore not entirely immune to that 2% fall in government bonds. So we see that here in terms of fund returns. The funds underperformed their targets in the second quarter by around 30 basis points, rising to 100 basis points for the cautious fund, and that's due, as I say, to its higher exposure to bonds. Over time, the funds have tracked their targets well, with the exception of the past 3 years, which is still heavily influenced by 2022's sell-off. Final point I'll make here is that Momentum Global Cautious clearly still has work to do. Returns are lower due to the fund's allocation to those aforementioned bonds. Those bonds, global government bonds, have returned minus 0.5% per annum over the past 10 years. Thankfully, we've managed to do better than that. They've returned minus 5.9% per annum over the past 3 years. Again, we've done better than that. The fund has returned close to 5% over the past 12 months. That is helping to repair those longer term returns. When we look here in terms of current market dynamics, bond yields, as it says, have gone up. They've been driven up by sticky inflation, and hence we want to own relatively more of them today because, of course, yields are that much higher. When thinking about equities, on the other hand, valuations in part are rich, and that's been driven by enthusiasm, as I say, for that AI theme. We'd note, however, there's still value outside of US mega cap stocks, and therefore we're not completely divesting from equities. Far from it. We have plenty of equity risk. We just want to make sure it's in the right areas. We see an opportunity in value stocks. They've been through this extraordinary period of underperformance that's picked up by this chart here. What this chart is showing is if you'd bought growth companies as opposed to value companies, you would have done phenomenally well for an extended period of time. You start from about the middle of that line, you'll see that it's almost been one-way traffic. That said, go back further in than this chart, say the 1980s, you'll see value will always come through in the end. And indeed, look towards the right-hand side, that steep fall in the line, that again is a period of value doing well. So we think it's worthwhile having value exposure today, and so we do. Japan's a theme you'll have heard me talk about a number of times on these videos. We continue to hold Japanese equities. I mentioned that great return from them over the last 12 months. That's really been driven by companies in Japan starting to use some of the idle cash reserves on their balance sheets. They've had cash sat there doing nothing with it. As a result, the share prices aren't reflecting it because it's completely idle money. All of a sudden, that money is being returned to shareholders. That makes the companies more attractive because you can start to access some of that cash. That's been going on for about 12 months. Japan has done well. Is there more to come? We think there is. As it says there, at 40% cash on the balance sheets of these companies is still extremely high. As more of that cash comes back to us, we expect to continue to do well. In the short term, if you take, say, a 12-month view, we think the dynamics shown on this chart, which is all about the interest rate cycle, we think this is positive for asset classes. What you've got here, you've got things like the main measure of inflation that the Federal Reserve in the United States tracks. That's the dark blue line, so that's inflation coming down. You've got, on the other hand, you've got US unemployment, the red line, just starting to tick up. Similarly, you've got US job openings, the lighter blue line, that's coming down. Add those two things together, inflation, less and less of a problem. The employment picture, on the other hand, the jobs market, more and more of a problem potentially, although coming from a low base. Add those two things together, cutting interest rates makes sense. When the Fed does that we think could be a positive tailwind. That's on a shorter term view. Longer term, perhaps, we do have to be conscious of this. That is complacency in markets. These various measures here, looking at things like volatility embedded in markets today, looking at spreads. Spreads are just telling you how much extra yield do you need to lend to riskier companies. Those things, both those things, looking low today. That's a sign of complacency. So we're not all out overweight risk as a result. Instead, we're relatively defensively positioned. But final chart from me. Overall, I think it's important to remember that we're still in this high yielding environment. Stark contrast to where we were for that period post the global financial crisis. With starting yields like this, that should help to underpin decent future returns from here. And you can see those numbers there ranging from 15% down. With that then, because I think I've exceeded my time, here are those important notes. And finally, it's a thank you from me and the team. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. As you've heard today, MFP is making strides in aligning its investment offering to its advice process. By articulating the investor outcomes that we are solving for, we considered not only the outcomes, but also the appropriate timeframes and how we think about risk. The fact that we aren't trying to get to these outcomes at all costs addresses our ability to help advisors keep their clients invested. We know that the main reason investors switch is because they can't stomach the volatility, and we also know that the behavioral tax is one of the main reasons investors don't reach their investment outcomes. So if we can just keep our clients invested, we know that they have a far better chance of getting to the outcomes. It's also exciting to hear Sonia and Therese's plans for wealth management. I have no doubt that the tools and integration that they will bring will add significant value to your practices. It also always gives me a sense of comfort when I hear our investment partners sharing their views on the global and local economy, the impact that the different economic drivers are expected to have on the portfolios, and then to hear in detail how the market and asset movements have affected our performance. The journey that MFP started with Momentum Investments Group 4 years ago has evolved enormously. It started with MFP trying to solve for the advice risk by getting Equilibrium to put together the Allegro models. But this only solved a portion of the problem, and those original models were only made available to a few advisors. Once an investment committee was established with representation from MFP advisors with large investment books and MFP advice representatives, Anton Swanepoel was tasked with articulating the MFP advice process, the advice outcomes, the appropriate time horizons that we use in bucketing clients, and also how we manage risk. The articulation of the advice challenges allowed us to articulate the problem statement in a way that allowed the construction of models specific for MFP and your clients. And so the MFP Focus Model Portfolio range was born. From its launch, these models aim to solve an MFP need, and it's no surprise that they have over 1.5 billion in AUM at the moment. At this year's MFP conference, Flof, the MD of Equilibrium, shared with us that the investment product house had agreed to expand its offering by taking the Momentum Focus Fund of Funds and restructuring them to cater for MFP's exclusive needs. The result being that our advisors would in future have the ability to choose between fund of funds or model execution based on their clients' needs. Those who are particularly sensitive to capital gains tax might prefer a fund of funds execution, while those who like the full look-through that a model provides will probably still prefer the model execution. In any event, the good news is that from 1 July 2024, the MFP Focus models and the Momentum Focus Fund of Fund ranges are managed by one Equilibrium team with Rupert Gissing and Ronnie Bormann as co-portfolio managers across both ranges. And you would have heard that a lot of the alignment to get them to the end state has in fact already been done, with the remainder in progress. I know that this doesn't solve your concerns around all the historical challenges in selling Momentum Fund of Funds to clients, but it does mean that going forward, the benchmarks, time horizons, and risk parameters of these two ranges are being managed according to MFP's mandate to Equilibrium. As an independent DFM and multi-manager, Equilibrium will continue to engage with you, give you detailed reporting and other relevant information to help you have richer conversations with your clients. For all intents and purposes, Equilibrium is MFP's personal investment team, and you should see them as an extension of your practice. By sticking to the house view funds and using the MFP Focus or Momentum Focus ranges, not only are you reducing advice risk in your practice, but you are giving your clients a much higher probability of getting to their outcomes. We are also working with the Wealth platform to ensure that we integrate better into their processes and give our advisors better insights from a behavioral, investment and reporting perspective in order to make your lives as easy as possible. Now that concludes today's Outcome Matters. From our side, thank you for attending. I trust that you have found some key insights and value in today's content which can translate in meaningful discussions with your clients. Before I say goodbye, just a reminder to watch the full session and add your ID number to the CPD section so we can verify your attendance. Until next time, goodbye.